Hi, this is a video about spooky video games, but what is spooky? Well, according to French-German philosopher Jean-Laurent Kirstein, spookiness can be defined as an arbitrary trait assigned by hacks on the internet to vaguely describe something that subjectively evokes discomfort, anxiety, fear, or dread. Wowzers! With this in mind, we can begin to discuss specific games in terms of how spooky they are. So here's the deal. Over the last month I've been playing a bunch of spooky games. I'm going to do an overview, rundown thing of every game I played and assign it a score, and maybe we'll compare things at the end, I'm not sure. Cool? Cool. Oh, and if you're wondering, there's no rhyme or reason to why I'm talking about the specific games that I am. These are just what I happen to play this year. Oh, and if it isn't obvious, spoilers are going to be a thing for every game on this list too, so. I began my spooktastic adventure with Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion. Embracing spookiness right in the title seemed like a fitting place to start from in our journey. It's also very accessible because it's free, it's not a very demanding game, and it's pretty straightforward. The premise of Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion is that there's a mansion, and you're curious about it, so you break into it to satisfy your own curiosity because you're an awesome role model, and you meet a girl named Spooky who challenges you by saying,
"Can you, humble player, make it through 1,000 rooms?"
And then you just start walking. You begin wandering the halls, traversing corridor after corridor, room after room, slowly chipping away at your goal of reaching the 1,000th one. At first I was unsure if this even was supposed to be a horror game at all, because for the first little while of playing, the only thing you ever really encounter are these little cardboard cutout cuties that spring out from the wall, accompanied by some kind of obnoxious jump scare sounds. Maybe it's startling to some, but it's not anything that would be considered by most people to be spooky. On top of this, the residing ghost and owner of the mansion herself is like this happy, cutesy looking chick. And even when the actual monsters start appearing, and spoilers, that happens, they're still two-dimensional like everything else in this world. That's just kind of the style in the whole game. But actual monsters do start appearing, and things can get surprisingly intense surprisingly quickly. I did think that the writing was pretty bad. Like, every bit of tangential information that sets up the environment or monsters tends to be too on the nose, I suppose. You'll get journals hinting or implying some kind of spooky stuff, and you're like, okay, I get it. I can use my brain to piece together the information here to infer that scary thing X has happened. And then you'll run across 3 more notes, each spelling out the same scary thing more and more in case you didn't get it the first few times. So that's all kind of awkward and amateur, but it's also not a huge part of the game. What is a huge part of the game is more so the tons of monsters that you'll come across and have to evade to progress. The game is pretty much one large showcase of monster after monster, each getting a little time to show up and say hi before making room for the next one. And you know what? That's fine. Some of these guys are actually a little spooky, even if the vast majority of the time they're just walking at you ominously without really changing up the gameplay too much. Is the long-haired Asian ghost lady an overdone stereotype at this point? Yeah, but it's easy to take it at face value for the short-lived homage that it is and appreciate it for that. Is the Majora's Mask reference monster a little silly and out of place? Probably, but his whole teleporting thing still freaks me out all the same. There are plenty of problems in the game that kill the vibe though. For one thing, the game is already short, but it feels like it would benefit from being even more condensed. Like, is anyone out there walking through 50 rooms in a row like, this is great, wow, engaging, A+. The appeal of the game is just seeing what kind of environment or monster is going to pop up next. It's like a haunted house going from theme to theme with each room. I don't know how much time in between all the monster chases was really needed in this game, but I can say that it's probably a lot less than what we've got going on now. I mean, if I weren't playing this for a video, I think I would have probably quit before the end just because all the hallway walking is so repetitive and takes so long. This led to me just becoming bored and anxious for the next monster to show up or for the next thing to just start happening, which really took me out of the game and, like I said, killed some of the creepy vibes. And oddly enough, a lot of the more involved and fleshed out areas are towards the end of the game too. You'd think they'd want to put them in front to give a good first impression and get the player hooked and immersed as early as possible, but I guess not for whatever reason. Also, the whole ending, at least the one I got, is just really strange and sudden, and there's just a weird boss battle with this random creature for seemingly no reason at all. And unlike with all of the journals you'll find strewn about the mansion, here you're not given any clues or hints about what this thing is, and more importantly, any kinds of weaknesses it might possess or ways to hurt it or anything, so not a great final impression. Overall, Spookiness score is maybe like a 3-ish out of 10. And keep in mind, this isn't like a review or something where 7 is average. 0 would be a normal game that is not spooky at all, so 3 is 3 whole points of spookiness, so way to go game. Good job. Just take a look at this game's main menu with me for a second. Pretty cute, or sorry, kawaii. Pretty kawaii, right? It definitely looks like your average, adorable, and disgustingly heartwarming visual novel kind of deal, but of course you're aware that this video is about creepy games, so you know that something's up. Just like I did when I stumbled on this game in my Steam recommended list because I was playing a lot of horror titles at the time. As much as it might seem like it in theory, I do not think that people will be caught off guard by the run-of-the-mill facade this game has at first glance. I mean, it has warnings plastered right at the front about disturbing content, and it seems like talk of this game and its true nature had already spread like wildfire across the internet shortly after it was released, which just completely annihilated my inner hipster, by the way. I thought I was going to be such a cool dude with my in-depth video on this crazy visual novel thing nobody had heard of, but what can I say? I just can't bring myself to be a disgusting wagon rider like the rest of these sheeple in the gaming scene. By the way, I'm going to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's next, so please stay tuned for that. Anyway, there's still the chance that, like me, you end up expecting some kind of vampiric, demon, ghost, Cthulhu kind of stuff to start happening, but really, this game is just all over the place in terms of theme and direction. Obviously, you have to start out with the generic, wacky, lovable, kawaii harem type stuff to set up the subversion, that's a given. You're a generic high school boy with a generic childhood best friend girl, and you end up joining an after-school literature club composed of cute anime babes. Like I said, I was immediately expecting some of these girls to secretly be horrific, terrible monsters preying upon new members of the club or something, but instead the game took a darker turn. The turn that it took was not spooky though. Alright, let's get that out of the way right now. Closest this game comes to being actually spooky is about 3/4 of the way through, I'd say, when things are completely unraveling and all of the other characters are going insane and everything is just crazy. Where it seemed like the game was going at first was instead exploring the idea that all these happy, cheery harem girls were actually battling extremely deep-seated and debilitating mental issues. When the childhood best friend character reveals to you that she hasn't just been clumsily missing her alarm and sleeping in every day all these years, but lying in bed struggling to find a reason to get up and continue living, it's not at all spooky. It's just scary, okay? It's a different kind of scary. And dude, if it kept going, I think it would have kicked my ass. That's just too real, man. I wasn't ready for it. All I wanted was to have a nice night relaxing, watching high school girls reveal themselves to be secret Cthulian vampire ghost demons and stuff, and you gotta spring this on me out of nowhere? Man, a bit of a downer. But the game didn't stay here for very long, instead wrapping up this whole plot point with the very predictable outcome of the girl hanging herself. I mean, we all saw that coming, right? And while I'm here talking about this, Jesus Christ, what kind of human gets caught almost kissing another girl by his lifelong friend that is madly in love with him and also severely depressed, as discussed mere hours ago, and thinks, yeah, nothing strange about her not showing up to school today. Sleeping in as always, isn't my crazy harem high school life just so wacky and silly? Goddamn. So after this is when the game starts going crazy and where I would say it's at its highest spook value. It starts glitching out and generally just being weird and creepy, forcing you to restart your adventure from the beginning, but in a world where your best friend never existed. This time around, your clubmates start becoming more and more agitated with each other, and it seems like you're hallucinating even harsher behavior or maybe even reading the cruel inner thoughts of the girls. Characters start appearing in front of the text box or having their art spliced in odd ways. The storyline this time ends up being about one of the girls of the club becoming unbearably obsessed with you, where the crazy murderous stalker kind of thing is cranked up to 11. You have her creeping towards you in the dark with like freaky eyes, implying the other girls would be better off dead, cutting herself, and just being generally really freaky and stuff. This part also has one of the coolest and most clever uses of like a standard visual novel engine that I've seen, when you have to use the skip text button for several minutes at a time, just holding it down to fast forward the in-game weekend, really hammering home the fact that time is passing while also forcing you to watch a body decompose in front of you, which is pretty messed up and everything. But then the game goes a totally different direction again, and this one kind of ruined everything that the game had built up for me. It's not like it came out of nowhere or anything, the game was hinting at this for a long time, but things get extremely meta. As it turns out, one of the girls in the club is self-aware and has been trying to rewrite the game so that she would become the ideal choice and the winner of your affection out of the cast. She's basically been amping up all of the negative traits of the other girls, like their depression or their obsessive tendencies, to make them look bad. Thing is, well, first of all, did I completely miss the part where all this stuff is explained? Who is this lady? How does she know she's in a game? How can she change the game? Is she supposed to be part of the game in the first place, or like an outside entity, or what? It's really confusing, but aside from that, the whole fourth wall breaking thing really just destroyed any emotional reaction I was getting out of the experience too. I don't know, dude. Just having the game itself come out and tell you that all the characters are fictional and rewritable and just objects even within the narrative itself is a pretty good way to kill off all of my immersion and empathy with what's going on. I didn't really get too creeped out in the first place, but after the game acknowledges that it's a game, that just killed the mood. And that character herself breaking the fourth wall and addressing the player is not really a very spooky thing, it's just kind of a thing. Oh boy, Five Nights at Freddy's. I'd like to ask for this discussion, if I may, that we all try and divorce these games from their fandom or any kind of tangential legacy of the series. Let's just all imagine sitting down and playing Five Nights at Freddy's during the first week it was released before anyone else discovered it, free of any preconceptions or emotional reactions to even the name. Which is how I first experienced the game, and I remember it really well. And you know what? Five Nights at Freddy's is actually pretty spooky. Asterisk. Okay, let's just talk about only the first game for a little bit here, and like I said, I want you to imagine playing it with almost no idea what you're in for. You're trapped in this office, informed that you're supposed to be keeping tabs on these animatronic animals that have to be left active so that their servos don't lock up or something, and that you've got hulking goddamn blast doors to your office that you can close for no reason. Yeah, don't worry about it, dude. So you sit there, in the silence and in the dark, and you're trying to keep an eye on these things through your cameras like you're supposed to, and wait. Were all those spare part heads always pointed at the camera like that? You start hearing things clanking around in the dead of night, you start seeing the robo animals inch towards your room while you aren't looking, and all of this is honestly super creepy. These games have actually got a pretty good and wonderfully spooky setting in my opinion. So what went wrong? The game. The game went wrong. We could have had some kind of experience where instead our objective was more of a traditional adventure kind of thing, requiring the player to actually get out and have to explore the environment. Or maybe we could still be in the security room, but guiding somebody else through the main facility, or controlling some kind of drone or something. The realization that the player was still very much vulnerable to attack holed up in that room could be a terrifying little mini twist of a realization early on in the game. It would be cool. The point is, whatever route they could have gone, we need some more meat to the actual game, because what we're settled with right now is A, really boring in its own right after about 15 minutes, and more importantly for the topic at hand, B, completely, utterly desensitizing to the spookiness of the game. The game is, mechanically, very bare bones, and does not have anywhere near enough content for a satisfying full campaign or anything like that. And yet, completing the game took me 5 hours, and that's not counting the extra levels afterwards. Christ. By hour 5, the game has devolved into a frustrating experience that relies pretty much exclusively on absolute randomness to keep it as lengthy and difficult as it is. The only skill you've had to use as a player at that point is forming a mental flowchart of the proper order of corners to check and what to do when there's a spooky robo-duck lurking within them. Close the door, check on Pirate Cove, or crank the music box or whatever, check if they're still there, and go back to checking your corners again. And I really don't think there's too much to say about all of the later games in the series, since they're all either reskins or at least very similar to the first one, with, you know, an extra thing to worry about, or new animatronics, of course. Though, to give credit, there are additions like minigames and stuff, which I think are neat enough, and they don't show up super often, and they also explain some of the cryptic stories and all, but the core Five Nights at Freddy's gameplay from the first one is pretty much untouched. So, if you only happen to play the game for like 15 minutes, it could be a really spooky game, I feel like, in the 7-ish range maybe. But if you end up playing for long enough to get to night 5 or beyond, I feel like that pretty much shrinks you down to... Layers of Fear is a bit more of a laid-back kind of game. More of a just walk about and watch stuff happen around you without your involvement kind of deal. The concept of this one is that you're a renowned artist, possibly a bit of a nutcase, but who knows, and you walk around and watch stuff happen. So, hey, I'm just gonna tell you right now that this game is not spooky, and I'm gonna tell you why, and it's gonna be pretty quick. Layers of Fear takes place largely inside the mind of the protagonist, and this is made pretty clear pretty early on. It's like being in a nightmare, so unless I'm mistaken and Freddy Krueger is looking around here somewhere, that means that while the imagery can be strange and disturbing enough, you're not ever in any kind of actual danger or anything. I definitely have come to realize that, for me at least, when something is all a dream or otherwise pointed out to be not real, even in the context of the game, I get taken way out of the experience, and any kind of scare factor it may have had just dissipates. All the terrifying rats and wives and vegetables in the world don't really affect me emotionally if the context is just that I'm some dude tripping out in his bedroom somewhere, as is pretty much the case with this game. Most of the unsettling stuff that might have happened has already happened, so there's a disconnect from the whole affair for me that leaves me decidedly unspooked. And also, melting messy hallways just isn't very intense for me anyway. Maybe there's some home renovators out there in a cold sweat playing this game, but I'm definitely not one of them. Alien Isolation is a horror game based on the Alien series of films, which, seems like a pretty logical use of the IP and everything. I had never seen any of the Alien movies when I sat down to play this game, which I thought might give me an interesting perspective on things. It really didn't. I mean, I've never seen the movies, but they're ubiquitous enough anyway that I kind of still know what the alien is. It's an alien, and what it looks like and what it does. And even if I didn't, it really doesn't matter, as the story here is pretty straightforward, and it feels like a lot of the intricacies of the companies that are involved in the plot are too complicated to have been covered in the movies anyway. Also, I didn't really read those because I'm lazy. So the ships that you start in right off the bat are pretty good as far as spookability goes. Even in the normal, not alien-infested one, the lighting and the general retro-future vibe is really cool and immediately unsettling. From there, quickly enough, you find yourself stranded in space on a vessel housing the eponymous alien, though at first you're only really going up against other people or these crazy android dudes, which I didn't really find very scary. Though I will admit they can sometimes come out of nowhere when you aren't expecting it and startle you pretty dang good. But of course, the star of the game is that lovable alien lurking around, and when you first come across it, I'm willing to bet that you might very well find yourself extremely frightened. The alien is really scary at first, and it feels really powerful, and it doesn't mess around, man. You might be used to games where you can just crouch down behind any kind of box or knee-high cover lying around and be completely invisible to the enemy. You might be used to games where you can break line of sight with the monster and just hide in a closet for a couple of seconds and everything is good. You try those kinds of shenanigans around here and you'll quickly be finding yourself extremely deceased. This goddamn thing can spot you under tables, inside lockers, around corners, and even in the vents, which you've probably come to love and cherish like some kind of filthy rat. And when it spots you, you might as well just give up there because it's a lot quicker than you are. So this is all pretty terrifying and pretty well done. But my problem with this game, because I just exist to rag on everything cool in this world, is that basically the game is too hard and the alien is around too much. You'll often get into situations where the alien is just patrolling back and forth in front of the room or hallway that you need to get to, so you're just waiting forever or trying to skirt by when its back is turned only to have to retreat from the alien and hide in a locker and rinse repeat. At least that was my experience. And maybe I'm bad, but I mean us bad gamers need representation too, okay? So as a possibly bad Alien Isolation player, I found that the fright and panic I would experience at the hands of the alien began to quickly dwindle as I continued to play. What was terrifying at minute 1 was altogether frustrating at minute 60. Instead of being immersed and genuinely scared for my life, feeling like a mouse frantically trying to escape the household cat, I was now bored, and I was only scared of having to repeat the same steps over and over to get back to where I was before the alien would nab me again. I felt like in order to succeed, I had to thoroughly examine and analyze the alien's behavior to figure out its patterns and how to exploit them. This is not a good thing, in my opinion. I feel for horror and for something to be frightening, being a mystery is really important. The less I know about the monsters lurking in the dark, the less I feel like I understand them, the more terrifying they are. So when the game is so difficult, it not only desensitizes you from being caught and killed and scared, but it forces you to learn about the aliens so much that you begin to see it as more of just an obstacle than a living, breathing threat capable of making decisions you haven't already accounted for. So, Alien Isolation started really strong for a little bit there, but I was disenchanted to it eventually. Even still, it's not too bad, but I feel like there was a lot of lost potential there. Quick one here, more of an excuse just for me to complain a little bit because, dude, how the hell is Half-Life not considered a horror game? I can't find any overview pages on the internet that ever mention how this game is absolutely terrifying. Or was, I mean. It's looking a little worse for wear these days, so I don't know if you could call it that anymore, but seriously, do you know how traumatized little baby Ninox was after deciding, gee willikers, I'm gonna give one of my dad's super neato shooter games a try, and playing this? With something like System Shock 2 around the same time, everyone knew what they were getting into from the get-go. I mean, you've got Scary Computer Lady giving you the death glare right on the cover, super creepy atmosphere as soon as you get past the tutorial. Baby Ninox noped right the hell out of that game after about 2 seconds. But Half-Life? Half-Life starts you out as some nerd on his morning commute to work. You can grab a coffee, chat with your coworkers and everything. The box art is more of a, hell yeah dude, you ready for some intense shooting bro? Kind of vibe. Less of a, holy shit, all of my coworkers are screaming in agony as their heads are replaced with aliens taking control of their body, kind of thing. Weird slime creatures are lurking on the ceiling waiting to eat people alive, and don't even get me started on the weird dinosaur lion sharks, Jesus. If that's not considered horrifying and that's not considered horror, then I don't know what is. It's like it was all an elaborate ruse designed solely to terrifying young, foolish, idiot, moron, dumb boys for years to come. Why did I even play that game so much? I remember a few months ago, a friend of mine who is 101% opposed to even the slightest bit of scary horror stuff in any media, casually mentioned wanting to play Yomawari Night Alone. I realize now that she had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Maybe she'd seen like a single screenshot and deduced based on the adorable character design that this game was about going on some kind of whimsical, lighthearted adventure. Maybe some kind of family-friendly story of a child learning to face their fears of the dark, overcoming black cats in the road and white sheet ghosts hung out to dry in the neighbor's yard. And because of this friend, my head was now filled with misconceptions too when I sat down to play it for the first time. I mean, just look at that logo. Just look at this cute little lady with a cute little bow in her hair. It's cute, man. As long as you somehow manage to selectively ignore the weird creepy eyeball 2 inches away, like I did, anyway. But these faulty expectations of mine did not last very long. The game starts with our hero and her adorable little bow, as well as her dog, and after about 2 seconds of tutorials there's already some kind of spooky shadow monster spirit lurking in the background of the forest, but what leaves much more of an impression than that is when, after about another 2 seconds of tutorials, you accidentally cause and watch your dog get run over by a car. Well, kudos for breaking down some barriers between the protagonist and me though, as we're pretty much one and the same person at this moment. This is my actual face as this happened. Good job, A+. From that point onward, you have the ability to wander the town in the dead of night on the quest to ultimately find and save your sister who has gone missing. Immediately, you start stumbling upon ghosts and giant ghosts and sad lady ghosts and ghost backpacks. There's a lot of ghosts in this game. It's a good atmosphere, and it does a good job of feeling daunting and lonely. It feels like the town itself just wants you to disappear and die. Very little is explained really, so you're just wandering from place to place looking for clues, hoping for the best, and trying to prepare yourself for what might come charging at you from across the street next. Just the strangeness of the creatures you find, and again, the desolate quality of the town had me feeling fairly creeped out at times. I mean, you know, a little bit. While it wasn't the most terrifying game I've ever played, it also didn't really make too many mistakes as far as scariness or anything goes, so that's good. People said this game was very scary. I heard really good things about this game in general, but I definitely remember talk of how it was actually a frightening Resident Evil game especially. And hey, wouldn't you know it, those people were totally right. You play as this dude on the search for his missing, presumed to be dead I think, wife who sent you a mysterious message. You travel to this rural area in Louisiana to look for her, where you're captured by a deranged hillbilly family. The whole crazy hillbilly thing had never been something that I'd found all that frightening, but you know what is? These tar monsters, my god! Even aside from those though, Resident Evil 7 hits the ground running with a really unsettling haunted house kind of vibe. The game does a really good job of feeling like it actually takes place in real houses and stuff, and it feels pretty damn unnerving when you're in the dark watching tapes of people getting murdered, or when you're walking around the place and you hear something, you know, existing in the darkness somewhere ahead. This game also seems to be Resident Evil returning to something closer to its roots, that is trying to be scary and away from the action movie kind of stuff it was doing with the other recent games. At least, that's what I've been told. I never played the early games, but I did play the fourth one, and let me tell you, those regenerators in the last area completely destroyed me when I did. You know, emotionally, I mean. And hey, maybe that's why I find these freaky goddamn tar monsters so terrifying now too, because they seem really similar in a lot of ways. So you've got their inherent scariness, compounded by the fact that for most of the game you've got pretty limited stocks of ammo, and most resources in general, and the aiming in this game is pretty unforgiving with how sporadic everything's movement tends to be. The game has a couple of other styles of scary to it too, like I mentioned before, you've got this crazy family and the dad will be wanting to hang out with you a lot, for example, but these kinds of things were more just intense or frantic and less scary and spooky. But at the end of the day, it sure does have those tar monsters, doesn't it? So overall a modest showing, I guess. Nothing too crazy going on here for most of the games, but we have Resident Evil with a pretty strong showing and leading the pack, so I guess that means if I had a spookiest games I played in 2017 listing, it would be right up there at the very tippy spot right below Subnautica.